Hi, welcome to the masterclass on digital financial crime investigation. Let's first start with understanding what we mean by the term crime, what we mean by financial crime, and what we mean by digital financial crime. Now, crime is an act that has been made punishable by law. So, if something is unethical or something is harmful or something is immoral, it doesn't automatically become a crime. It becomes a crime only when the law of the land specifically declares it to be illegal. So, the law would say that this act is prohibited, and if you do it, then this is the penalty that would be imposed on you. The penalty could be putting you in prison, it could be fining you, it could be a combination of both. That's the basic definition of crime, and it varies between countries. What is illegal in one country may not automatically be illegal in another country. A classic example would be in many countries, you're not allowed to marry more than once. That's illegal. But in some countries, you are allowed to get married more than once at the same time. So we've got to understand that crime varies by jurisdiction, by country. Sometimes, even within the same country, there may be states which follow different laws. So that's the basic definition of crime. And examples would be violent crimes like attacking somebody, theft, fraud, drug related offenses, cyber related offenses. Then we move on to financial crime. Financial crime is a crime which is committed to obtain money or property or to hide that money. Now, here the harm is more economical and not really physical. So, the criminal's goal here is to make some kind of an illegal financial gain or to disguise the money that he has already made illegally. So, the key point is that the motive in financial crime is going to be some kind of gain or some kind of hiding of money or assets. And it can cover a very wide range of economic offenses. And examples would be fraud, theft and embezzlement, bribery, corruption, tax evasion, money laundering, all of these would come in. Finally, we come across the term digital financial crime. Now, what does that mean? Digital financial crime is financial crime in which the value that is moved or stolen or hidden is going to be inside digital systems. And in fact, that is where cryptocurrencies and online infrastructure really comes into the picture. Now, I'm not trying to say that before cryptocurrencies, digital financial crime did not exist. Of course, it did. They would use electronic money. Today, you're using cryptocurrencies, central bank digital currencies, which are also called CBDCs. You could be using privacy coins like Monero. All of this come under the ambit of digital financial crime. So the offenses may remain the same. What is changing is the technology which is coming in, the digital form of the money which is coming in. And technologies used could include anonymity networks like Tor and VPNs, encrypted communications, mixers and tumblers, decentralized infrastructure, privacy coins, and so on. So I hope this gives you the idea or the big picture of crime is an act against law. Financial crime is a crime involving financial gain or concealment. Digital financial crime is that same financial crime, but using digital systems and technology. As an investigator, you have to understand this whole ambit, and then you have to figure out how to break these digital concealment techniques and tools that are used by criminals. Let's move on to understanding the evolution of money. Like, how did we finally reach cryptocurrencies? Where did the world actually start from? So the world started from barter system. Now, in the barter system, goods would be swapped directly. So let's say I had a bunch of horses and you had a lot of weapons. I wanted the weapons and you wanted horses. So we could make a trade, exchange. But now, where the problem would come is, what if you don't want an entire horse? You say, no, I'm not giving you 100 weapons in return for one horse. I'm only ready to sell you 5 weapons. Now, I can't give you half a horse. That doesn't make sense. So, that is where barter system met its limitations. You were not always able to find someone to make a proper trade with. That's why the world moved on to commodity money. What we move by commodity money, as you can see here, is items which have some kind of intrinsic value. They have value in themselves because humans feel that there is a value. So, for example, gold or silver or even salt was used because everybody accepted it. They had some level of durability. Salt may not last very long unless it's stored properly, but gold and silver can last for centuries. In fact, it has. So, that is where commodity money came in. So, the value comes from that commodity. Then we moved on to cash, which is coins as well as notes. So these became standardized. But there's a big problem when we talk about this kind of money. Let's take a very simple example. So what I'm holding is a 500 rupee note. Now my question to you is this 500 rupees? Not, is this 500? Is it a note? No, that's not my question. My question is this actually 500 rupees? And you'll wonder what kind of a dumb question is this? Obviously, this would be. But if I was to read the promise written on it, there is a gentleman who has signed this promise, the governor of the Reserve Bank of India, and he says that I promise to pay the bearer the sum of 500 rupees, which means this is not 500 rupees. This is a promissory note payable to the bearer on demand issued by the Central Bank of India, which is the Reserve Bank of India. But it's obviously is going to raise issues about, does it intrinsically have value? And not really. It has value only because the government says it has value. And that is the reason currency like this can be demonetized, because it is not intrinsically valuable. I hope that concept is clear to you. Then we moved on to digital money. Now, these are funds that exist only as entries in a ledger. There is no physical token. It is controlled by banks. It is controlled by intermediaries. And the key idea is that this value is a digital record in a centralized system. So when I want to give money to you, that money actually exists as entries in the database of my bank, and then it exists as entries in the private database of your bank. So it's kind of a transaction between the databases of financial institutions. That's how today's conventional digital money, like even UPI, which is used in India, that's how it kind of works. Then we come to the concept of cryptocurrencies, which are very different. The value here is not stored in private databases of private entities, but it is stored on a shared public ledger called a blockchain. No single person controls it. Anybody in the world can access it. It is decentralized, transparent, permissionless. You don't need permissions. Like to set up a bank account, you need to give your KYC, and the bank ultimately needs to give you an account. It's not, you cannot force them to give you an account. But in the blockchain, you don't need anybody's permission. You could just go there and create your own wallets and addresses. And I'm going to show you what that kind of looks like in just a few minutes. So that is the concept of cryptocurrencies: decentralized, transparent, permissionless. Now, there are various types of cryptocurrencies. There are stable coins, where a cryptocurrency is pegged to, say, the US dollar. There are privacy coins, which make it very difficult to track it down. And now there's a new concept called central bank digital currencies, where, for example, in India, the Reserve Bank of India runs its own blockchain network and issues the rupee on that directly. So it's no longer the private databases of banks. It is now the central bank itself running a blockchain and giving you and all citizens an account or an address on that. Now let's move on to a very interesting concept of digital assets and crimes. So what is a digital asset? You don't actually hold it in the conventional sense. What you really have is something called a private key. And this private key, it's a number, very, very difficult for anyone to guess it. In fact, it's, as of today's technology, impossible for someone to guess that. But this number, which I'm going to show you what it looks like, authorizes the movement of assets on this shared ledger, which we call as a blockchain. Everybody can see it, but nobody can secretly edit it. So it's a shared ledger in the sense like everyone can see it, but movement of assets can only be done by the people holding the secret key. So assets held by me can be moved only by my private key. So if I lose my private key, I lose my assets forever. If someone steals my private key, the asset becomes theirs. They can transfer it into their address. Now here you will come across three kinds of concepts. First is what we call as a seed phrase, which are these 12, 15, 21, 24 words, which can generate not just a wallet, but a series of wallets across multiple chains. I'm going to show you what that looks like. And whoever holds these 12 words actually controls all those assets. We come across terms like centralized and decentralized exchanges. Centralized exchange you must have heard about, like, for example, Binance, where a company knows your identity. They do a KYC and then they give you an account there. Decentralized exchange, no software knows you. You don't have to give any kind of KYC. Anybody can go and open accounts and do transactions. And then there is on-ramp versus off-ramp. Now, these are like doors where the cash becomes crypto or back into cash. So you give cash to somebody, they give you crypto. You give crypto to somebody, they give you cash. That's the on-ramp, off-ramp, and that's where our identity of the criminal could leak. Now, there is a paradox here that you should be aware about, that you would think that, because cryptocurrencies are anonymous, borderless, it's untraceable. But actually, no, it is traceable to a great extent because public blockchains, other than a few, are transparent. Every single Bitcoin transaction that has ever taken place in the world is visible to everybody using the blockchain explorer of Bitcoin, which reads the blockchain and tells you everything: which date, which time, which address made what transaction. You may not know the person behind it, but you know the addresses. And that becomes the most important and the most difficult job in digital crime investigation, is that how do we tie a blockchain address to an individual? And that is where obviously a lot of investigative work comes into the picture. Now, let me show you what this kind of an address looks like. So I'll take an example of EVM. These are a series of blockchains which are compatible with the Ethereum virtual machine protocol standards. So you may have heard about Polygon, you may have heard about Ethereum. These are blockchains that follow the same kind of standards. So the addresses and the keys would be the same. So if I look here, I can just click on generate new address. And by the way, this tool is available to you as part of the login for this masterclass. So you can try it out on your own. I made 4 tools like this: one for Bitcoin, one for Tron blockchain, Solana blockchain, and EVM blockchain. What I'm showing you here is for the EVM chain. So now if we look at this, I can just click on generate new address and it can start generating addresses for me. If you've used UPI system in India, you'll find the QR codes to be similar looking, but then all QR codes look the same, but they work very differently. So here for EVM, so this address and private key is reusable across multiple chains. This would be my address that I can give everybody. So I can tell you, this is my address, this is my QR code, please send me Polygon or ETH or whatever on it. But this private key I will keep very confidential. If someone else gets it, they can empty out all my crypto. So that's a very important thing for us to remember. Address is for the public, private key is only for you to keep very, very confidentially. Then I spoke to you about seed phrases. Let me show you what that looks like. I click a button here and it generates these 12 words. Now the 12 words look very random to you, but there is a particular protocol based on which these words are generated. So it's not like you can just take any word in the language. No, there's a collection of words from that 12 or 15 or 24 are taken by the system, randomly generated. There's a protocol which is followed. And by looking at this one single phrase, you can now generate unimaginable, or rather, I would say, countless wallets across different blockchains. So here I said that derive only 3, but I can say derive 10. And I press the button. And now it generates 10 for me. So there are 10 addresses and 10 private keys. So one private key attached to each address. Now let's take an example of how a criminal would use something like this. So the criminal would first make these 12 words, then generate multiple wallets the way I've just shown you. Now to different people that he has to pay money, say his employees, he would give each person saying, this is your address, this is your private key. I will send money in that and this is how you're supposed to spend it, for example. So from one single phrase, he is now able to generate millions of wallets and distribute it to whoever he needs to do that. So that is where the concept of seed phrase comes in. Another very interesting concept is where you can use a passphrase to create this, which means instead of those random 12 words, you can in your mind think of any random word. For example, here, let's say I think of the word apple, banana, and I say derive a wallet. Now it's derived a wallet, and no matter how many times I click this derive wallet, it's going to remain the same, because for the word apple space banana, all small letters, the address and the private key is always going to be the same. I can now add levels of complexity by maybe putting a salt word to this. So I can put any kind of word, like let's say I bring another fruit in, guava. And now if I press it, you notice the numbers change. But again, it's going to be the same as long as the salt is not changing. And I can even put the number of iterations. I say put 100,000 and I say derive. And now I've got this particular wallet. So now the benefit of this is I don't need to remember 12 words. I can remember 1 or 2 words or whatever I want. I'm not restricted by what kind of words I have. I can put symbols, question marks, exclamation, anything in this. And then I can add a salt to make it more difficult for people to guess. I can put iterations, which makes it even more difficult to guess. So there are various ways in which you can create these addresses. But the core point to remember is that the address is shareable to the world, the private key is not. So if we go back to what we were just discussing, the private key, which I just showed you, authorizes you to make expenditures or to move crypto controlled by the corresponding address. Everybody in the world can see that happening, but nobody else can move your assets unless, of course, they have your keys. So I hope this part made sense to you. I'll continue in the next video.